Las Vegas, site of the deadliest mass shooting in American history. It's been 2 months since Stephen Paddock murdered 58 people. It happened right behind where I'm sitting right now. Despite a lengthy and expensive investigation, a huge number of unanswered questions, some of them the most basic questions about that shooting, remain unanswered. We've come here in a search for answers, and we're going to devote a portion of the show to that in a minute. But first, it's among the great ironies in recent history, certainly the recent history of American criminal justice, an FBI probe begun to find corruption in government may simply have exposed corruption within the FBI itself. In the last few days, we've learned a great deal about a man called Peter Strzok. Until recently, Strzok was deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI. For the past 2 years, he was central to investigations into both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Last summer, Strzok was abruptly pulled off Robert Mueller's team of investigators. It didn't become public for months, but it happened. The FBI won't explain why it happened, even when asked directly by the Congress. Now we know it happened because Strzok was sending highly political text messages to his mistress, who also worked at the FBI, messages praising Hillary Clinton and denigrating Donald Trump. Now, why does this matter exactly? Well, because everything about Peter Strzok's job was essentially political. Strzok was the man who signed off on starting the current Russia investigation, the one that has totally overtaken the federal government. Strzok was also the official who altered James Comey's statement to avoid criminally implicating Hillary Clinton in her now famous server investigation. In other words, Strzok's political opinions mattered. In fact, they may have changed American history. And to illustrate it, consider this. Consider how Agent Strzok handled two different series of interviews in criminal investigations. According to a new piece by Chuck Ross of the Daily Caller, Strzok was the agent who personally interviewed Hillary Clinton's top aides, Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin, during the server investigation. Government notes from those interviews show that Abedin told the FBI she had no idea that Hillary Clinton was maintaining a private email server, in fact, only learned about it in the media. Mills, for her part, went even further than that. She claimed that not only did she not know about Hillary's server, she had no clue what an email server was. Here's the problem. It looks like both Mills and Abedin lied. In a 2010 email to Abedin, Cheryl Mills wrote this, quote, "HRC email coming back. Is server okay?" End quote. So it turns out Cheryl Mills knew exactly what a server was. A year later, Bill Clinton aide Justin Cooper emailed Huma Abedin to say he had shut down Hillary's server in response to a hacking attempt. Cooper also explicitly told the FBI in his own interview that he'd discussed Clinton's email server with Huma Abedin in 2009 while that server was being set up. Any reasonable person would conclude that both Mills and Abedin were lying baldly when they told the FBI they knew nothing about Clinton's email server. Lying to the FBI, as we've all just been reminded, is a felony. Yet neither Mills nor Abedin was charged or prosecuted for that. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn must be looking on at all this in bewilderment. Agent Strzok, it turns out, interviewed him too. But unlike Hillary Clinton's aides, Michael Flynn didn't get a pass. Flynn just pled guilty to a serious federal crime. His life has been destroyed. He's had to sell his house to pay his legal bills. Two cases, same crime, wildly different outcomes. What do the two have in common? Well, one highly political FBI agent. All of this raises the question, what other cases has Agent Strzok influenced in recent years? The public has a right to know the answer to that immediately. The FBI belongs to voters, not to Peter Strzok and his friends. The FBI doesn't see it that way, of course. From their perspective, you've got a right to shut up and do what you're told. And by the way, you'll stop asking so many questions if you know what's good for you. This is exactly how the secret police start, when law enforcement agencies decide to do the bidding of politicians rather than pursue impartial justice on behalf of the public. We ought to nip this nightmare in the bud right now. Dan Bongino is a former NYPD officer, and he joins us tonight. So, Dan, obviously, most Americans don't want to think badly of the FBI or to suspect that politics are behind key decisions in investigations. Sure. But I am sincerely baffled as to how Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills could apparently lie in their interviews to the FBI and escape any kind of penalty, and Michael Flynn lies and pleads to a felony charge. How can that be?
Because, Tucker, this is the weaponization of your government and mine. As a former federal agent and someone who worked inside the White House, if you're not scared of your government tonight, this case should at least tickle you a little bit and wake you up. Donald Trump's crime, make no mistake at this point, was winning this presidential election. Tucker, let's walk through just quickly how this started. This was all based on a crime, and I'm using the dreaded air quotes here, of a violation of the Logan Act. An act that has never been successfully prosecuted in the history of the constitutional republic, which says that private citizens can't negotiate with foreign governments. Really? Why isn't Jimmy Carter in jail for going to visit the Palestinians? Why isn't Jesse Jackson in jail for going to North Korea? The answer is because nobody took it seriously.
Or Barack Obama, who's abroad negotiating global warming agreements in effect all the time, or Bill Clinton, or any former president, you know, including Ronald Reagan. I mean, you're right. It's ridiculous.
Obama, who was just overseas doing that, by the way. This, and who started this whole thing with the Logan Act, according to multiple reports I've seen out there now? Sally Yates, who then used the premise of violating the Logan Act, a largely fictitious crime no one's ever been prosecuted with, used that as a premise to go to the White House and say, well, Mike Flynn is now subjected, could potentially be bribed because he violated a crime no one's ever been prosecuted for. Tucker, this is a frightening case. And then double that down with Andrew Weissman and Jim Comey. Jim Comey, who acknowledged starting the special counsel after he was fired by leaking sensitive data to the press. This case stinks. It's a scam, it's a sham, and it should scare every American, regardless of your political stripes.
So I guess what confuses me is the lack of oversight. For whatever reason, and honestly, I'm confused by it, the executive branch, the White House, and the leadership of the DOJ haven't done a lot to rein them in. But the Congress also has oversight over the FBI. And it's not clear to me why FBI officials who refuse to answer basic questions like what's in Strzok's texts, why they're not being held in contempt of Congress.
Yeah, what's doubly frightening about this, Tucker, is they're stonewalling on congressional requests for information, and they're looking at potentially by Devin Nunes being held in contempt of court. Think about what we're talking about here, Tucker. The branch of government most intimately related to the people, the House of Representatives, elected every 2 years. They represent the smallest number of people at the federal level. These are the accountable entities. They have said, the representatives of the people, the FBI, give us this information now. There is something going on, and we demand as representatives of people to know it. And the FBI, not a knock on the men and women, I'll be crystal clear, they're wonderful, I've worked with them, they're great. FBI management, someone there who's been infected with the political bug, has said, nah, we're just not going to abide by that. I mean, what are you operating, a shadow government? Are you serious? Congress has demanded answers and you're just saying, no, we're not going to do it?
I don't understand why everyone seems so passive in the face of this. I mean, this is a perversion, one of the institutions that most Americans respect and want to respect, the FBI, but also it's the most powerful federal agency. I mean, they can destroy your life in an afternoon. Why is no one stepping forward to rein them in?
You know, that's a great point, Tucker. I mean, if you're a Democrat in Congress watching this show right now, I know we've got them. Aren't you worried? The government is so powerful right now that the most powerful man in the world, Donald Trump, the president, can do nothing to stop this investigation, this sham investigation from coming after him. If you're a Democrat, aren't you a little worried right now that may boomerang back on you? Conservatives have been worried about this for years. It's time for liberals to wake up and shut this disaster down. This is a political witch hunt at its worst. It's an international disgrace right now, what's going on. We're being embarrassed on the global stage. This is not an investigation. This is a scam.
Liberals used to worry about things like that before they took power. Now they just benefit from them. Dan, thanks very much for that.
Yes, sir.
Peter Strzok, not the only political concern for Mueller's team, as you just heard Dan allude. Newly released emails show that a man called Andrew Weissman, who's Mueller's deputy on the Russia probe, praised acting Attorney General Sally Yates for refusing to defend President Trump's travel ban. Using his work email, Weissman sent Yates an email after Trump fired her saying, and I'm quoting, "I am so proud and in awe. Thank you so much. All my deepest respects." In other words, Weissman despises Trump so much that he supports politically motivated bureaucratic defiance of the president. Nevertheless, he remains on Mueller's team, and it raises a bunch of obvious questions about the fairness of this process. Britt Hume is Fox's senior political analyst, and he joins us now. Britt, I don't think, I've held back for months now criticizing the Mueller investigation because I want it to be on the level, and I think Americans have a right to believe that justice can be done in this country. And so there have been all these stories about the number of Mueller deputies who are big Democratic donors, ignored them. But at some point, you got to wonder, how could a team comprised almost exclusively of people who hate the subject of the investigation conduct an impartial investigation, a fair one?
I think that's the question, Tucker, and it's one that I've been asking myself in the last several days, given what we learned about Mr. Strzok and now Mr. Andrew Weissman. And, you know, first of all, I don't like special counsel investigations or special prosecutors or independent counsel or any of the lot. I think it's always and everywhere a terrible idea because it sets up what amounts to an unaccountable unit using the Justice Department resources, but really as a practical matter outside the Justice Department's control, and it creates a situation in which a prosecutor appointed to do an investigation feels that he is called upon or she is called upon to prosecute. So it creates, I think, a bias in favor of action even where none may be warranted, and it's been only a handful of these appointed special prosecutors who've ever backed off and said nothing to see here. So I think that's a problem. Now you enter into it this possibility that important figures within the investigation may be harboring serious bias against the subject of the investigation, and I think you have a problem that is made even worse. This Weissman thing particularly bothers me. After all, what was at stake here, Tucker, was an order that was issued by the president, controversial though it was. I don't think it was good policy, but I think he had the legal right to do it, and I think the Supreme Court has signaled in recent days and before that it also thinks he had the legal right to do it. And here was the acting attorney general in the Justice Department saying, I'm not going to support you in this. I'm not going to make the case for what you've done here. That is a dereliction of duty. She was fired for it. She should have been fired for it. It was a huge grandstand play. She was widely applauded on the left for doing that. But and for this Weissman guy to weigh in with this cringingly this email, this suck-up email to her, raises, I think, serious questions about his impartiality, or whether he can be impartial. So I think we have some serious questions on the table here, no question about it.
So the basic question is, does this have anything to do with collusion with Russia and Russia's effect on the 2016 election outcome, which was, as you know, the original pretext for the investigation that seems to have been abandoned? Nobody seems to have noticed its disappearance. Will this investigation wind up, in the end, bearing directly on the question of Russian involvement in the 2016 election?
My guess is it will. Remember, Tucker, this investigation, which Mueller took over, started under Comey way back in 2016 and was a counterintelligence investigation. That is to say, it was an investigation by the FBI acting as an intelligence agency to determine the extent of Russia's efforts to penetrate and influence the election. And it was not, at that time, thought to be or to be a criminal investigation. And in the course of that, you'll remember, Tucker, we now know that James Comey told now President, then candidate Trump, that he was not the subject of the investigation, or a subject of the investigation. Now we've progressed to the point where it's taken over by Mueller, and in his charge, the question of any collaboration between the Trump campaign and the Russians is certainly part of it, but it's not all there is to it. So at some point, we're going to get, I think, from Mueller's team a report on what the Russian side did, what they tried to do. And we will find out, presumably in the course of that, whether they think there was some kind of collaboration between the Trump camp and the Russians that had some significant effect on the election. I continue to hold out hope that in the end, Mueller, a man of considerable reputation, will have the integrity, if he finds nothing really worthy of prosecution, to say so. But I'm getting less confident of that by the day, I'm afraid.
I am too. I don't want to feel that way, but the evidence is mounting. Britt Hume, thank you.
You bet.
We're broadcasting live tonight from Las Vegas, just steps from the scene of the worst massacre in American history. Why do so many questions remain about that massacre, and why are police appearing to move so slowly to answer the public's concerns? In that vacuum, conspiracy theories are growing. Our investigation live from Las Vegas, just minutes from now. Stephen Paddock's killing spree on October 1st was the deadliest one-man shooting in the history of this country. 58 people were killed. He died as well. It's a tragedy that demands answers, but instead questions have only piled up. Why have we heard nothing more about Mary Lou Danley, for example, his girlfriend, Paddock's girlfriend, even though police say she may be hiding something? Where was Vegas's 40-member SWAT team as Paddock went on his rampage? For ourselves, we have asked why Las Vegas police have repeatedly obstructed our questions or been outright hostile to us. Weeks ago, they refused to provide answers to basic questions about security guard Jesus Campos, the one who took off for Mexico right after the shooting. Today, they made it impossible for us to get a filming permit on public land. Why is that? We have no idea, but it tells you something interesting. Catherine Lombardo is an attorney representing many of the shooting victims here in Las Vegas. Doug Papa is a former police officer and casino security expert, and they join us both tonight. Thank you both for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
So, Doug, give me the overview here. We were talking in the break. We have compiled a list, my producers and I, of questions to which we have no answers. Very basic questions. I won't repeat them on the air, but basically we know basically nothing.
That's true.
Why?
I don't have any idea. It was one of the reasons why I started writing the stories right after the incident for the Baltimore Post-Examiner. I wrote 35 stories to date and try to get some answers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And every time you called up the PIO, initially they're either very rude or they just say, they comment that it's an ongoing investigation and they can't talk. I had some specific things that really bothered me from the start. One is where was the 40-member SWAT team the night of the worst mass shooting in American history? And
let's start there. What's the answer to that?
Nobody knows, and actually nobody actually asked the question to Sheriff Lombardo to this day. I was the only one that wrote these in the stories. I do not know where they were. I do know from doing my investigation and talking to sources within and outside the Metropolitan Police Department that Levi Hancock, who was the officer that breached the door with explosives, went in with an ad hoc team of 2 canine officers and I believe Carlson was the gang unit detective. And he was a little concerned about his safety from what I was told because he was going in with people he never worked with before. His SWAT team members weren't anywhere in sight. That's one of the things I raised, one of the issues I raised in the story. I do not know.
And that's, you can add that to a long list of things we don't know. So I think a basic question I've had from the beginning, and I haven't heard it addressed, is did Stephen Paddock come to the attention of authorities, federal, state, or local, before this shooting? I'm not alleging a conspiracy, but it's a basic question. Did they know who this guy was? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer, but I suspect the answer is yes, based on what I've heard. Listen, I can't remember what's rumor, what's conspiracy theory, and what's facts on some days, but I've heard a lot of things. I've actually received a lot of information on paper. Yeah, I think they knew who he was. Of course they knew who he was.
So answer that even more basic question. You're handling the legal end of this. Where's the information coming from? The FBI have apparently taken over the bulk of the investigation. Is there a central source for known facts about what happened, or is it just ad hoc?
There is no source right now at all for any information as to what happened. Like I've said from the beginning, we expect it to take 4 to 6 months for the investigation. Look, I've said from the beginning that the lawyers for MGM and the corporate executives have been hunkered down in a room from day one, moment one, and they are putting all of their resources to protection of themselves, defending themselves.
That's it right there. Look, I don't know the answer to any of these questions, but I know lying when I see it. I can smell it, and there's a lot of it around this story. I suspect that, I'm not alleging a cover-up, I don't think it's as simple as that, but that the authorities are trying to cloak their incompetence from the public. Do you have evidence that that's true?
Well, one of the things I picked up on the stories I did a story on was that I was told through sources inside and outside the police department, and I verified it, was that the homicide division early on was pulled off this case. Now, homicide detectives normally investigate homicides and suicides because you don't know if a suicide is actually a homicide until it's investigated.
Right.
They were pulled off the case, and the case was given to an entirely different bureau commander. It answers to something to the public accountability section. Now, the captain of that force investigation team that's investigating the Paddock shooting, and I was told this by the homicide unit of the LVMPD, the captain who oversees that bureau is Captain Kelly McMahill, who's the wife of the number 2 guy running the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Under Sheriff Kevin McMahill. Seems a little bit bizarre to me. When I try to get some answers from from Metro Police to find out why the homicide division was pulled off and it was given to the force investigating team. And you got to understand something. The force investigation team for Metro investigates officer-involved shootings and police officer use of force. I could not get any answer.
Right. Well, that's the story of this whole thing. So let me ask you just a couple of really simple questions that I've been wondering about. From the very beginning, we heard about bump stocks. That was kind of the signature piece of hardware from this atrocity, the bump stock. And yet the photographs of the rifles in the room that were publicly disseminated had bipods on them. And anyone who's ever operated a bump stock or understands how it works can tell you can't operate a rifle with a bump stock if it's got a bipod because it doesn't move back and forth in the way that it needs to. Are they still saying that bump stocks were used in this? Is that still a claim?
They haven't told us, but what we suspect is that he had a complete and total arsenal upstairs in his room.
But for what purposes? And why would he have two shooting positions when only one? Just looking at it, it seems like the angles was not necessary to have two. Any insight on that?
Based on what we've heard, it was fully planned out by him. He was up there for, we think, 6 days. Now, you know that the first few days he was there, he was, I think, registered under his girlfriend's name. So he was actually there for 5 or 6 days planning this. We don't think he left the room once.
Were housekeepers ever in the room?
We don't think housekeepers were allowed in the room either. He had the do not disturb sign. So once MGM, Mandalay Bay, gives us the answers that I've requested, that we've requested through our subpoena process, you know, through the civil investigation pursuant to the lawsuit. Listen, I just received a piece of information last week. I received the special event permit from the city. And there it is in black and white, handwritten, filled out by an MGM executive for this event that happened right behind us. It wasn't Live Nation Entertainment. It was MGM, a corporate executive, who filled out the special event permit for this particular concert. So their fingerprints are all over it.
So why would, finally, Doug, why would the interior door be locked? Police said they broke through, A, and B, how in the world could an officer have fired a weapon accidentally in the room after the shooting? Is there any explanation for how that might have happened?
No. Again, I raised both those issues in my story. As far as for the door being locked, because they did breach the outer door when they went in.
Yes.
You heard that on the radio. And then when you went in after they cleared the first room, you hear them on the radio saying we have to breach the second door in 5 seconds. Now, if you're breaching the door, obviously they couldn't get in, so it was locked. And my question has always been, well, who locked that door? According to Sheriff Lombardo, Paddock committed suicide right after he fired his last round, somewhere in that time period. So who locked that door from the inside? Because it had to be locked from the inside.
It's one of many questions, and I suspect we should be here all week into next month to get answers. But we're going to continue following the story. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for covering this. My clients appreciate it.
We mean it.
Thank you.
Supreme Court indulged its sweet tooth today as it considers whether bakeries may be required by the government to bake cakes for gay weddings. That case is next. And we'll have more on the Mandalay Bay shooting aftermath, of course, live from Las Vegas tonight. The topic of wedding cakes has finally found its way to the Supreme Court. Colorado officials say that Masterpiece Cake Shop can't sell wedding cakes at all unless it agrees to provide them to same-sex weddings, even though those weddings conflict with the owner's Christian beliefs. Today, the Supreme Court held oral arguments in that case, which has critical implications for the scope of religious freedom in the United States and for the exercise of speech itself, of course. Shannon Bream hosts Fox News at night, but she's also our chief legal correspondent and very good at that. And she joins us now to explain what this case is about. Great to see you, Shannon.
You too, Tucker. Well, it was, heated inside and outside. Lots of demonstrations there today, but inside heated as well because the bench was what we call hot. They were often asking questions, talking over each other, not really allowing the 4 attorneys who argued this case today to really get in a word edgewise. And what is at the center of this case is essentially Jack Phillips is a Christian bakery owner out of Colorado. He was approached by a same-sex couple who said, we want you to do a wedding cake for us, a custom wedding cake. At the time, same-sex marriage wasn't even legal in Colorado, but they were planning to get married in another state where it was legal and come back. And he said, listen, I'll sell you anything in the shop, but I'm an artist and I can't lend my skills to anything that I think is offensive to my Christian faith. He had turned away other cakes and other events as well. So he says, it's never about the person. It's about the message he as an artist is expected to endorse. And he says, there's no way the government can force me or compel my speech on that front. The couple says they left humiliated. They say, this is not about a cake. It is about freedom. It's about LGBT rights. They say they don't want another couple or other LGBT individuals in this country to go through what they went through. They said, listen, if you're in the stream of commerce, essentially you need to be able to step up and sell. You can't pick and choose who your customers are going to be. I want to read you a little bit of what Justice Anthony Kennedy said, because everybody watches him, of course, because he has authored many cases, many decisions that are, broaden LGBT rights and help the LGBT community. He's talked about the dignity of them and their families. But today he raised an interesting point when he said this. He said, tolerance is essential in a free society. Tolerance is most meaningful when it's mutual. It seems to me that the state in its position here has been neither tolerant nor respectful of Mr. Phelps' religious beliefs. He was tough on both sides, but he'll probably be the key in this case, Tucker.
It's a very reasonable point, I think. Shannon, thanks a lot.
You got it.
Mike Ferris is President, CEO, and General Counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom. That's the group that represents Masterpiece Cake Shop, and he joins us tonight. Mike, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker. Great to be with you.
So, tell us why this case affects the rest of us who don't own cake shops in Colorado.
Because it's broadly about freedom of speech. And the artists that create cakes, the artists that create music, print, all sorts of artistic creations. Anybody who's in the free speech business would be affected if the ACLU's theory of the case is adopted. They contend that anybody who creates any kind of speech in the stream of commerce has no First Amendment rights whatsoever to not be coerced by the government. And that kind of coercion of speech is at the pinnacle of what the Free Speech Clause has always been designed to protect against.
Well, wait a second. The ACLU's theory, I thought the ACLU was founded in order to protect the freedom of speech of the unpopular, by the way, of war resistors in the First World War and Nazis and other people on the fringes. But they've given up on that charter?
They have indeed. I think they've lost their way. I didn't agree with the ACLU on many issues over the year, but I admired them for their consistency on free speech. But today they've turned their back on that. The agenda of advancing the gay marriage issue has, I think, blinded them to the free speech implications of their own position. Moreover, the court really focused, Justice Kennedy in particular, focused on the religious intolerance that was shown by one of the Colorado Civil Rights Commissioners. And Justice Kennedy engaged in the most heated exchange I've ever seen in the dozens of Supreme Court cases I've watched, and basically forced the Solicitor General of Colorado to disavow a statement by one of the commissioners who was very anti-religious in their comments. And I think that may really turn this case in an important direction.
Yeah, I don't really know what this has to do with same-sex marriage or gay rights, and I personally know some gay people who are appalled by this, because it suggests that government can tell you, whoever you are, exactly what to think, and if you disagree, they can punish you. I mean, that's a threat to everybody, no matter who you voted for.
That's exactly right. America used to be founded on the premise that I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. That's an important principle that was at stake today, and I really hope and believe that the court's going to come out right on this, but it's going to be a close call. Very, very contentious today.
Is that true? So who on the Supreme Court would you expect would uphold the idea that government can punish you for having views it dislikes?
Some of the liberal justices on the court made comments that would tend to put them in that direction, but I have hope that a couple of the others that are usually in the liberal category may see the better of it, and so I'd rather not name names unless I predict wrongly and lose a vote on the Supreme Court.
Oh, that might be counterproductive. Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.
A writer at a college newspaper said the DNA of white Americans is, quote, an abomination, and therefore they should be killed. That actually happened. Up next, we'll ask why newspapers would publish genocidal rhetoric like this and what happened to the kid who wrote it. Plus, we'll continue our ongoing investigation of the shooting here in Las Vegas, or right across the street from where it occurred. A columnist at Texas State University has been asked to leave the paper after he wrote a column denouncing white people and their DNA as, quote, an abomination. In a column which was published last week by the University Star, Rudy Martinez said he'd only met a dozen, quote, decent white people in his whole life, and he added this: I hate you because you shouldn't exist. You're both the dominant apparatus on the planet and the void in which all other cultures, upon meeting you, die. Rudy Martinez has not apologized for his words. We talked to him today, actually. He originally agreed to come on this show, and then said he was too afraid because he was being pursued by white supremacists or something. So he's not here. But Colin Pruitt is a student at the Texas State University. He started a petition to defund the University Star newspaper in response to the column that Martinez wrote, and he joins us tonight. Colin, thanks for coming up.
Hey, Tucker, thank you for having me on.
So here you have a guy calling for genocide of an entire group. Tell me, in the student newspaper, tell me the response on campus when this shows up in the newspaper box.
Well, you know, with the normal student body and parents, it's outrage. Unfortunately, with the university administration and with those on the far left on campus, it was support, which is unfortunate both for our community and for our country. And I think it's indicative of a larger problem on college campuses.
Well, it is indicative of a couple larger problems, but support, can you be more specific? In what way did they support it?
So they basically just defended his right to quote-unquote free speech when we attempted to defund the University Star. Our position with Bobcat Liberty Movement and the conservative coalition that's attempting to defund it is that we believe that our tuition dollars are best spent on things that promote our values, our university's values, and our community's values, and not on white death and these extreme radical leftist points of views that the university administration backs.
Well, I think of an extreme radical left point of view as like, I don't know, public funding of or public takeover of factories or something. This is just like Nazi stuff. This is genocide. And in case you think we're overstating, I know you don't, but our viewers may, and I'm quoting now, white death will mean liberation for all. That's a direct quote from his piece, and it's filled with quotes like that, and we're not taking them out of context. The guy called for genocide of a group. How could the school defend something like that?
Well, the school didn't defend it. They did fire the writer, but they didn't take enough action. And the reason they didn't take enough action is because the University Star has a history of putting out articles like this, including one that called for, just about a month or two ago, the sterilization of an entire class of people. They also wrote an article called Free Speeches for White People.
Wait, the sterilization of whom?
The wealthy. They said it was good for the environment if the wealthy were sterilized and were not allowed to reproduce, as they put it. And
it's like Khmer Rouge stuff. So what would happen? What would happen? I mean, let's stop playing games, kind of, for not you, but
sure.
It's got a First Amendment right. If he had written a column saying, I sincerely believe in genocide for any other racial or ethnic group, would he still be on campus? Wouldn't someone call the cops? I mean, if he called for the killing of people, do you think the administration would say, he's got a First Amendment right?
Absolutely not. And this goes back to a larger issue, which is that a spineless university administration, and Denise M. Trout, the president of the university, is willingly and actively engaging in sanctioning hateful rhetoric that comes from the University Star. That's not only this article, but a series of articles. And until the paper is completely defunded and all of the radical people on the opinions board are fired and disciplined by the university, it's not going to stop.
Did the president of the university make the point that genocide of a specific group, or all genocide for that matter, is bad? Did they, at least say, we find these views disgusting or anything like that?
She said that she found them disgusting, but her actions speak louder than her words. She sent out a 2-paragraph email while there's actual riots going on campus and people are getting hurt at the university because of violent leftist rhetoric. And all she can respond with is a 2-paragraph email and fire only the person that wrote the article, not the opinions editor that sanctioned the article and not only agrees with the article, but is actually crowdfunding for the person who was fired because that person was arrested at a violent protest of Donald Trump's inauguration. And she's crowdfunding for his legal fees, and she's still employed by the university's sanctioned paper.
Yeah. It's all falling apart. Colin, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Tucker.
Gun control activists pressuring the Attorney General of the state of Nevada to act following Stephen Paddock's rampage. The Attorney General will be here next as we continue to broadcast live from Las Vegas in our quest to understand what exactly happened here in America's deadliest shooting 2 months ago. We'll be right back. shots were still ringing in the air almost when gun control activists seized on the tragic shooting in Las Vegas 2 months ago to raise more money, of course, and to demand new laws. Now they're putting pressure on the state's elected officials. Adam Laxalt is the Attorney General of the state. Numerous people, including the Clark County District Attorney, are pressuring him to enforce a background check law voters narrowly passed last fall. Laxalt says there's a simple problem with that law. It's completely unenforceable. Adam Laxalt joins us tonight. Mr. Attorney General, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker. Appreciate it.
So I guess just the macro question, which is, leaving aside the details of the gun control policy, shouldn't we try to figure out why this happened before we propose solutions that might have prevented it?
Well, this is what happens every time, that when there's an incident that involves guns in any way, of course, the political left immediately goes to this issue. And you're right. I mean, there were calls for gun control and calls against me regarding this ballot initiative and enforcement within hours of what happened. And you're absolutely right. We need to figure out what's going on.
So Paddock went to really a lot of trouble to commit the atrocity he committed and spent a long time doing it and a lot of money. People don't do that for no reason. Do you have any inkling as to what that reason was?
You know, the best way that I kind of try to understand what happened here, is as horrible as this was, is that this is basically a modern-day serial killer. And, you know, once upon a time, you had the streets of London, and someone would go through and kill particular women for weeks at a time. And unfortunately, this is kind of a modern face of a really sick person plotting a way to kill hundreds of people over a long period of time. And you know, unfortunately, he pulled this horrific act off.
He certainly did. So the background check proposal, tell me what's wrong with the background check in this case.
So the Bloomberg Gun Group, they poured in almost $20 million in the state of Nevada in 2016 so that they could get this ballot initiative through. And despite people complaining about the language, it passed, and it passed by less than 1%. The problem was the way they wrote it, they said that only the FBI was allowed to do background checks.
Right.
And we are a point of contact state where Nevada, we do our own background checks. So when push came to shove, this thing passed, our voters passed it, but the FBI sends a letter saying, well, we're not going to do the background checks, and you can't make us do the background checks. So I was asked for a legal opinion by the governor's agency that does our background checks. Says, what do we do with this? And understandably, right opinion says, hey, without the FBI doing the background checks, there's no way to move forward with the ballot initiative.
So in effect, this would mean no background checks.
Yeah, on this particular area of private sales for guns, there's no way to move forward. And it's important to know that the way they wrote this was intentional. In our state, if they had sent it to the state, then it would have cost the money. And it would have looked like a tax, and likely it would not have passed if people felt they needed to pay for this particular initiative.
But I guess what I find so confusing is that Stephen Paddock followed existing law. And the laws that gun control advocates have told us for generations would prevent shootings like this did nothing of the sort. I believe he bought all of these firearms legally and underwent background checks. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as we know, he went through all the checks, and he had no history of mental illness that anyone was aware of, no prior felonies. So he went through all the normal hoops and was a lawful gun owner.
Then why are we having the same stupid conversations again and again? I don't understand.
You know,
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We're broadcasting this evening in unseasonably cold weather from Las Vegas, site of the deadliest mass shooting in American history. It's been 2 months since Stephen Paddock murdered 58 people. It happened right behind where I'm sitting right now. And despite a lengthy and expensive investigation, a huge number of unanswered questions, some of them the most basic questions about that shooting, remain unanswered. We've come here in a search for answers, and we're going to devote a portion of the show to that in a minute. But first, it's among the great ironies in recent history, certainly the recent history of American criminal justice, an FBI probe begun to find corruption in government may simply have exposed corruption within the FBI itself. In the last few days, we've learned a great deal about a man called Peter Strzok. Until recently, Strzok was deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI. For the past 2 years, he was central to investigations into both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Last summer, Strzok was abruptly pulled off